thought I wouldn't notice?" Liam's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that competed with the wind howling against the cabin glass. "She's exactly what you asked for," the voice on the satellite phone sneered, crackling with static. "A bride. We just didn't promise she'd be the pretty one. Consider it a favor, Liam. Even a mountain man needs a good laugh." Liam stared through the frost-rimed window at the woman huddled on his porch. She wasn't laughing. She was shivering violently, clutching a thin, utterly useless designer coat, a jagged, prominent scar cutting across her left cheek. The affluent, untouchable Vance family had sent their ugly daughter into the frozen expanse of the Rockies as a cruel joke. "You made a mistake," Liam said softly, his jaw ticking before he killed the connection. "You sent me the only one worth keeping." The rhythmic, deafening thwack of the helicopter blades faded, swallowed instantly by the vast, suffocating silence of the Alpine ridge. Olivia stood completely still, her boots sinking 2 inches into the fresh powder. At her feet sat a single leather duffel bag. She watched the black dot of the chopper vanish against the bruised purple twilight. They had really done it. Her father's final words before shoving her onto the tarmac echoed in her ears. "Isabella refuses to go to a savage in the woods, Olivia, and we need his timber rights. You've always been good at hiding in the background. Go hide in his." The wind bit through the thin wool of her coat, a vicious reminder that she was entirely unprepared for this altitude. She turned slowly, her breath pluming in white clouds, to face the cabin. It wasn't a shack. It was a fortress of heavy timber and dark stone, anchored to the side of the mountain as if it had grown from the rock itself. Warm, amber light spilled from the heavy, triple-paned windows. Before she could force her frozen legs to take a step toward the porch, the heavy oak door swung inward. Liam filled the frame. He was taller than the rumors suggested, his shoulders broad enough to block the light behind him. He wore a heavy flannel shirt over thermal Henley, his dark hair slightly overgrown, a shadow of a beard framing a jaw that looked carved from the granite beneath their feet. But it was his eyes that pinned her, a piercing storm gray that swept over her shivering form, her inadequate coat, and finally, the left side of her face. Olivia's instinct was to turn her head, to let her dark hair fall forward and hide the thick, silvery scar that ran from her cheekbone to her jawline. A shattered mirror at age 12. Her mother had wept over the ruined symmetry, not the blood. She fought the urge, lifting her chin instead. If he was going to laugh, she wanted to look him in the eye when he did. Liam didn't laugh. He didn't even flinch. He stepped out onto the porch, the bitter cold seeming to have no effect on him. "You're not Isabella," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough at the edges, devoid of the mockery she expected. "No," Olivia said. Her teeth chattered so violently the word fractured. "I'm the punchline." Liam's gaze darkened. He stepped down the wooden stairs, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. He closed the distance between them, stopping mere inches away. Up close, he smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something clean and metallic, like falling snow. He reached down, ignoring her completely, and scooped up her heavy leather duffel with one hand as if it weighed nothing. "Get inside," he ordered, turning his back to her. "My father said—" "I don't care what Arthur Vance said." Liam threw over his shoulder, not breaking his stride. "If you stand out here for another 5 minutes in that ridiculous coat, hypothermia will set in. Inside, now." Olivia hesitated, her pride warring with her plummeting core temperature. The wind howled again, a sharp warning, and survival won. She trudged up the steps and crossed the threshold, stepping into a wave of heat that felt like a physical blow. The interior was vast, smelled of roasting meat and cedar, and was meticulously clean. Books lined entire walls. A massive stone fireplace dominated the center of the room, a roaring fire casting dancing shadows. Liam dropped her bag by the door. He turned, holding a heavy wool blanket. He didn't wrap it around her. He offered it, leaving a respectful foot of space between them. "Take off the wet coat. Sit by the fire. Don't touch the iron grate." Olivia took the blanket, her fingers numb and clumsy. She watched him walk away toward an open kitchen area, his movements precise and unhurried. He hadn't called her ugly. He hadn't demanded an explanation. The silence stretched, heavy not with awkwardness, but with a tension Olivia didn't know how to navigate. She shed the damp wool, wrapped the rough, warm blanket over her shoulders, and sat on the edge of the leather sofa. She stared at the flames, waiting for the cruelty to begin. It always did. The pain of her nerves thawing was excruciating. Olivia gripped the edge of the blanket, gritting her teeth as pins and needles raced up her legs and arms. She kept her eyes fixed on the fire, hyper-aware of the sounds coming from the kitchen. The clink of cast iron, the scrape of a wooden spoon. Liam returned 20 minutes later, carrying a steaming mug and a heavy ceramic bowl. He set them on the low, scarred wooden table in front of her. "Venison stew," he said briefly. "Coffee. Drink the coffee slowly." Olivia looked at the rich, dark broth, her stomach twisting violently with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the tension-choked breakfast in her father's penthouse, but suspicion was a hard habit to break. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy. Liam pulled up a heavy wooden chair opposite the table and sat, resting his forearms on his knees. He looked at her, truly looked at her. "I want you to eat so you don't pass out on my rug. That's not what I mean." Olivia tightened the blanket around her. "You made a deal for Isabella. The beautiful, perfect Vance heir, the trophy. My family sent me because they think you're beneath them, and they think I'm worthless. They wanted to insult you." "They did," Liam said plainly. Olivia flinched. There it was. "They insulted me," Liam continued, his voice dropping a register, "by assuming I would care about the packaging more than the person inside it, and by sending a woman into a sub-zero blizzard in a fall trench coat." Olivia blinked, the harshness of his assessment throwing her off balance. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm angry." Liam's eyes flashed, a brief, terrifying glimpse of the temper that had supposedly driven him from the corporate world to this mountain. "But not at you. Eat." She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. The stew was incredible, rich, earthy, and hot enough to chase the ice from her chest. She ate in silence, waiting for the interrogation. Why the scar? Why the limp in her confidence? Why didn't she fight back against her father? But Liam asked none of those things. He sat quietly, watching the fire, giving her the dignity of ignoring her ravenous eating. When she finished, setting the spoon down with a soft clink, Liam stood. "There's a guest room down the hall, last door on the left. Heated floors, extra quilts in the chest. The bathroom is across from it. Use the hot water sparingly. The pipes freeze if the boiler is overworked." "Wait," Olivia said, standing up. The blanket slipped, revealing the simple dark sweater she wore underneath. "We have to talk about the contract. My father expects a signed transfer of the timber rights in exchange for my placement here." Liam stopped halfway to the kitchen. He turned slowly, the shadows playing across the sharp angles of his face. "Your father thinks he bought a husband for his unwanted daughter with a few thousand acres of pine." "Didn't he?" she challenged, raising her chin. The scar pulled tight. Liam stepped closer, the sheer physical presence of him making the air in the room feel thin. He stopped just out of reach, looking down at her. "I bought this mountain to keep parasites like your father out," Liam said, his voice deadly quiet. "I agreed to meet his daughter to see exactly what kind of game he was playing. Now I know." "So you'll send me back," Olivia whispered, a strange, sudden dread pooling in her stomach. Going back meant utter humiliation. It meant her father's wrath. Liam looked at the jagged line on her face, then up to her wide, defensive eyes. "I don't throw away things that survive the cold, Olivia. Go to sleep." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the firelight, her heart hammering against her ribs. He had used her name, not the sister, not the mistake. Olivia. The absolute darkness of the mountain morning was disorienting. Olivia woke to a silence so profound it felt heavy. In the city, there was always the hum of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the muffled footsteps of staff. Here, there was nothing but the steady, rhythmic sound of her own breathing. She threw off the heavy quilts. The heated floor Liam had mentioned was a luxury her bare feet desperately appreciated. She dressed quickly, pulling on a thick cashmere sweater and her heaviest jeans. Still laughably inadequate for the environment, but better than yesterday's silk blouse. When she walked into the main room, the fire was already reduced to glowing embers. The cabin was distinctly colder. Liam was nowhere to be seen, but through the heavy glass of the front window, she saw a steady beam of light cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. She moved to the window, rubbing a circle of condensation away. 50 yards from the cabin, inside a partially enclosed wooden shed, Liam was standing over a massive diesel generator. He was holding a wrench. A heavy flashlight clamped between his teeth, his breath rising in thick plumes. He looked frustrated. Olivia hesitated. Her mother had trained her to stay out of the way, to be invisible. A woman with your face shouldn't draw attention, Olivia. But Olivia hadn't spent her life entirely in the shadows. While Isabella was at galas, Olivia was in the garage of the estate, paying the mechanic to teach her how to take apart the vintage Aston Martin. Engines made sense. They had rules. They didn't care what you looked like. She found a heavy canvas work coat hanging on a peg by the door. It was easily 3 sizes too big, swallowing her completely, and smelled intensely of Liam. Wood smoke and clean sweat. She shoved her feet into her designer boots, wincing at their lack of tread, and stepped out into the biting cold. The air was so sharp it hurt to breathe. She navigated the icy path carefully, the snow squeaking under her soles. As she approached the shed, she heard Liam curse under his breath, a sharp, guttural sound. The wrench clattered against metal. "Air in the fuel line?" Olivia asked. Liam spun around, pulling the flashlight from his mouth. The beam swept over her, illuminating the oversized coat and her windswept hair. He frowned, his brow furrowing. "What are you doing out here? It's 6 below zero. The cabin is losing heat," she said smoothly, stepping into the shed. The smell of diesel was strong, metallic, and familiar. "You're cranking it, but it's not catching. Usually means it sucked in air when it got too cold, or the fuel gelled." Liam stared at her, genuinely taken aback. He slowly lowered the flashlight. "The line is frozen. I'm trying to bleed it, but the bleeder valve is seized." "You're using the wrong wrench," Olivia said. She pointed to a smaller toolbox sitting on a stack of firewood. "You need the 10mm flare nut wrench, not the crescent. The crescent will just strip the bolt in this cold." Without waiting for his permission, she walked over, her small hands bypassing his larger ones, and picked out the correct tool. She stepped up to the generator. Liam moved aside, just enough to give her room, his eyes fixed on her. Olivia didn't flinch under his gaze. She leaned over the greasy machinery. "Hold the light closer," she commanded. To her surprise, Liam obeyed. The beam steadied on the valve. Olivia clamped the wrench onto the bolt. Her knuckles turned white as she strained against the seized metal. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack that sounded like breaking ice, the valve turned. A hiss of trapped air escaped, followed by a thick, sluggish trickle of diesel. "There," Olivia breathed, her hands slick with fuel. "Tighten it back up and try the primer." Liam stepped in, his arm brushing her shoulder. The contact sent a strange, electric jolt through her, completely unrelated to the cold. He primed the pump, then hit the ignition. The generator coughed, sputtered, and roared to life, a deafening, vibrating hum that immediately triggered the cabin's heating system. Liam wiped his hands on a rag, then turned to look at her. The harsh light of the shed illuminated her face perfectly. The scar was stark, undeniable. Her hands were covered in engine grease. She was wearing his oversized coat. She looked nothing like the polished plastic women of his past. "Where did you learn to bleed a diesel line?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the engine. "My father's mechanic," Olivia said, wiping her greasy hands on the canvas coat. "I paid him to teach me. I prefer things I can fix." Liam's eyes dropped to her hands, then back up to her face. The intense, evaluating look was back. But this time, it wasn't pity, and it wasn't assessment of her worth to her father. "Go inside, Olivia," Liam said softly, the rumble of his voice vibrating in her chest. "Before you freeze. I'll make breakfast." As she walked back to the cabin, the sun finally crested the mountain ridge, casting long golden shadows across the snow. For the first time in her life, Olivia didn't feel the urge to hide her face in the light. Breakfast was an exercise in quiet efficiency. Liam moved around the kitchen with the same deliberate grace he used to handle machinery. He didn't offer small talk, and Olivia didn't try to fill the silence. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the suffocating pressure to be entertaining, invisible, or apologetic. She just sat at the heavy oak island, her hands wrapped around a mug of dark, bitter coffee, watching him cook thick cuts of bacon and farm eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The peace shattered with the shrill, unnatural ringing of the satellite phone on the mantel. The sound was like a physical blow in the tranquil cabin. Olivia stiffened, her shoulders instantly creeping up toward her ears. She knew that ringtone. Her father insisted his private line have a distinct, commanding chime, even on remote devices. Liam flipped the bacon calmly, the grease popping against the iron. He let it ring 3 times before he picked up a towel, wiped his hands, and walked over to the mantel. He didn't just answer it. He pressed the speaker button and set the heavy black device down on the wooden surface, ensuring Olivia could hear every word. "Thorn," Liam said, his voice flat. "Liam, my boy, I was beginning to think the snow had buried you entirely." Arthur Vance's voice filled the room, dripping with artificial warmth that masked a razor-sharp condescension. "I trust the package arrived intact. My pilot said there were crosswinds." Olivia closed her eyes. The package, not his daughter. "She arrived," Liam said smoothly. He leaned against the stone fireplace, crossing his arms. He didn't look at Olivia, giving her the privacy to react without an audience. "Excellent," Arthur purred. "I admit, it was a sudden change of plans, but Isabella is simply too delicate for that sort of environment. Olivia, though, well, she's used to being in the background. I imagine she's already found a corner to hide in. Has she cried yet?" Olivia's chest tightened. She stared into her coffee, the dark liquid trembling slightly as her hands shook. She braced herself for Liam's response. A cruel joke shared between men. A confirmation of her worthlessness. "No," Liam said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. "She hasn't cried, but then, she's been too busy fixing the backup generator you clearly knew nothing about when you sent her here to freeze." There was a sudden, heavy pause on the line. The artificial warmth in Arthur's voice vanished, replaced by a cautious edge. "I beg your pardon. You heard me, Arthur." Liam pushed off the mantel, his posture shifting from relaxed to predatory. "You sent a woman into a sub-zero alpine ridge wearing a silk blouse and a fashion coat. You didn't send a bride, you sent a sacrifice. And you thought I'd be so insulted by her scar that I'd just sign over the timber rights out of spite and lock her in a room. Now listen here, Thorn." "No, you listen," Liam interrupted, the volume of his voice barely rising, though the sheer force of it seemed to rattle the windows. "The timber rights are off the table. The deal is dead. Do not send another helicopter. Do not call this line again." "You can't do that," Arthur barked, his facade completely shattering. "We had an agreement. You keep the girl, I get the Western Ridge. You think you can cross Vance Holdings?" "I don't think about Vance Holdings at all," Liam said softly. "But if you ever try to use Olivia as a pawn again, I will personally come down off this mountain and dismantle your company piece by piece. Leave us alone." Liam hit the end call button. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Olivia couldn't breathe. Her mind spun wildly, trying to process what had just happened. Her father, the untouchable titan of industry, had just been hung up on. More than that, he had been threatened. For her. Liam walked back to the stove and calmly plated the eggs and bacon. He slid a plate across the island toward her, along with a heavy silver fork. "Eat," he commanded gently. Olivia looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and searching. "You killed the deal. The Western Ridge is worth millions. My father will ruin you." "Your father can try," Liam said, sitting across from her with his own plate. He met her gaze, his gray eyes steady and unreadable. "But he fundamentally misunderstands the board we're playing on, and he fundamentally misunderstands you." "Why did you do that?" she whispered, the walls she had spent a lifetime building suddenly feeling paper thin. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just the ugly daughter they threw away." Liam stopped eating. He set his fork down, leaning forward until the space between them vanished into something highly charged and electric. "Never call yourself that in this house again," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "You survived his house. You fixed my engine. You looked me in the eye when you thought I was going to break you. There's nothing ugly about you, Olivia. Now eat your breakfast. The storm is coming." By noon, the sky had turned the color of a bruised iron skillet. The barometer on the wall plummeted, and the ambient light in the cabin took on an eerie, yellow-gray cast. Liam had been right. The storm wasn't just approaching. It was preparing to swallow the mountain whole. "We have about an hour before the whiteout hits," Liam announced, pulling on heavy, insulated coveralls over his flannel. He tossed a pair of lined, waterproof boots to Olivia. They were men's, 2 sizes too big, but thick and rugged. "Put those on. Layer up. I need help bringing the cordwood from the lower shed to the porch. Once the snow hits, we won't be able to see 2 feet past the door." Olivia didn't argue. She layered her cashmere sweater over a long-sleeved tee, zipped herself back into Liam's oversized canvas coat, and laced the boots tight. When she stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked her backward. It wasn't just cold, it was violent. It whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks like invisible needles. Liam was already at the lower shed, efficiently loading heavy logs into a canvas sling. She waded through the knee-deep powder, fighting the drag of the oversized boots. When she reached him, he handed her a smaller canvas tote. "Don't overfill it," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "Keep your head down. Follow my tracks exactly. There's a drop-off to your left, and the snow is hiding the edge." Olivia nodded, her jaw set. She loaded 4 heavy pieces of split oak into her tote, the rough bark scraping against her gloves. She hauled it up the incline toward the cabin, her breath burning in her lungs. For 45 minutes, they worked in a grueling, rhythmic silence. Down to the shed, load the wood, fight the incline, stack it on the covered porch. The temperature was dropping so rapidly, Olivia felt her eyelashes freezing together. But she didn't stop. Her father had always called her weak, but her father had never done a day of physical labor in his life. The burn in her muscles felt like rebellion. On their final trip, the sky finally broke. It wasn't a gentle snowfall. It was a wall of blinding white. The wind shrieked, driving the snow horizontally. Visibility instantly dropped to 0. Olivia was halfway up the path, carrying a heavy load, when the world simply vanished into a roaring white static. Panic flared in her chest. "Liam!" she yelled, but the wind snatched the sound from her lips. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed through the storm, louder than the wind. It sounded like a gunshot. A massive, dead branch from the towering pine next to the path had snapped under the sudden weight of the wind and snow. Olivia couldn't see it, but she heard the terrifying, rushing swoosh of it falling directly toward her. She froze, disoriented, bracing for an impact she couldn't track. A heavy weight hit her from the side. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her entirely off her feet and driving her backward into the deep snow, just as the massive branch slammed into the ground exactly where she had been standing. The impact shook the earth, spraying ice and splinters over them. Olivia gasped, the breath knocked out of her. She was pinned beneath Liam, his body entirely shielding hers from the debris. For a terrifying, breathless moment, the only sound was the howling storm and his ragged breathing against her ear. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice rough, his gloved hands quickly running over her arms and shoulders to check for broken bones. "No," she choked out, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "No, I'm okay. You?" "I'm fine." He didn't move immediately. His weight was heavy but grounding. In the freezing chaos of the whiteout, the heat radiating from him was intense, overwhelming. She could feel the steady, rapid thumping of his heart against her chest. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers. Snow was already gathering in his dark hair. His gray eyes were dark with adrenaline, tracing the line of her scar, then dropping to her lips. The air between them suddenly felt suffocatingly thick, the tension shifting from survival to something entirely different. For a second, she thought he was going to kiss her. Her breath hitched, but Liam's jaw tightened. He rolled off her, pulling her to her feet in one fluid motion. He didn't let go of her hand. His grip was iron tight through their gloves. "Stay behind me. Do not let go," he ordered. He blindly navigated the remaining 20 yards to the porch, dragging her through the blinding snow. When they finally crossed the threshold and slammed the heavy oak door shut against the storm, the sudden quiet of the cabin was jarring. They stood in the entryway, chests heaving, covered in snow. Olivia looked at the spot where the branch had fallen, her knees suddenly weak as the adrenaline began to crash. She looked up at Liam. He was already watching her, that intense, unreadable expression back in his eyes. "You don't quit," he observed quietly, unzipping his coveralls. "I can't afford to," Olivia said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "No one is coming to save me." Liam stepped closer, reaching out to brush a clump of snow from her hair. His knuckles grazed her unscarred cheek. "You don't need saving, Olivia. You just need a fair fight." The whiteout raged through the afternoon, burying the cabin in a fortress of snow. Around 4 o'clock, the main lights flickered, buzzed ominously, and died. The cabin was instantly plunged into twilight, illuminated only by the roaring fire in the hearth. "Generator must have tripped a safety breaker from the cold," Liam said, emerging from the kitchen with a heavy brass kerosene lantern. He struck a match, the warm yellow light throwing long shadows against the log walls. "I need to reset the secondary panel in the basement." "I'll come with you," Olivia offered immediately, stepping away from the fire. The thought of being left alone in the massive, dark room, listening to the wind tear at the roof, made her skin crawl. Liam hesitated, then nodded. "Bring the flashlight from the mantel." She followed him down a narrow, wooden staircase that descended beneath the kitchen. The air down here was cooler, smelling of dry earth and old paper. Liam held the lantern high, navigating a labyrinth of storage shelves lined with preserved food and tools. At the far end of the basement, Liam pushed open a heavy iron-reinforced door. "Panel is in here." Olivia stepped inside, sweeping the beam of her flashlight across the room. She expected a utility closet. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. It was a massive, subterranean study. The walls were lined with corkboards pinned with complex topographical maps, legal documents, and ecological surveys. In the center of the room sat 2 enormous tilted drafting tables. They were covered in highly detailed, hand-drawn architectural blueprints. She walked slowly toward the nearest table, her flashlight beam illuminating the precise, sweeping lines of a massive sustainable development project. It was brilliant. It integrated the natural landscape rather than destroying it. She looked at the bottom right corner of the blueprint. The title block read, "The Obsidian Ridge Project. Lead Architect, L. Thorne." Beneath it was a corporate seal she recognized instantly. Thorne Industries. Olivia froze. The flashlight slipped in her grip, hitting the edge of the drafting table with a dull thud. Thorne Industries was the only conglomerate on the western seaboard with enough capital and ruthless efficiency to rival her father's empire. The CIO, a legendary, notoriously private prodigy, had vanished from the public eye 3 years ago after a massive corporate buyout. Rumors said he had lost his mind. Others said he had retired to a private island. He hadn't. He had bought a mountain. "You're Liam Thorne," Olivia breathed, turning slowly. The beam of the flashlight cut across the room to where Liam was resetting the breaker box. "The Liam Thorne! You didn't buy this mountain to hide. You bought it to block my father's expansion." Liam slammed the heavy metal door of the breaker box shut. The overhead lights hummed, flickered, and surged back to life. flooding the room with harsh, fluorescent light. He didn't look surprised that she had figured it out. He simply turned to face her, leaning against the concrete wall, his arms crossed. "Arthur Vance has been trying to strip mine this valley for 5 years," Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He couldn't get the zoning permits because I bought the entire western ridge right out from under him. I own the access roads. I own the timber rights. I own the water." Olivia stared at him, the pieces violently clicking together. "Then why the marriage contract? Why agree to take Isabella? If you already won, why play his game?" Liam's jaw tightened. He walked toward her, stopping on the other side of the drafting table. He looked down at the blueprints, then up into her eyes. "Because Arthur was getting desperate," Liam said quietly. "He found a legal loophole, an old homesteading law from the 1800s. If a Vance married the deed holder, the land rights could be contested in a marital trust. He offered me his prized daughter to secure a legal foothold." "And you said yes?" Olivia asked, a sharp sting of betrayal hitting her chest. "You agreed to take a trophy wife to protect your land?" "I agreed," Liam said, his voice dropping into a fierce, intense whisper. "Because I have eyes inside his company, Olivia. I knew exactly what he was doing to his daughters. I knew he was auctioning Isabella off to the highest bidder to save his failing stock. And I knew about you, the daughter he kept locked away because she didn't fit his perfect picture." Olivia's breath hitched. She took a step back. "You knew he was going to send me?" "I hoped he would," Liam confessed, the raw honesty in his eyes pinning her to the spot. "I knew Isabella would never survive here, and I knew if I rejected the offer outright, he would sell you to someone much, much worse, to leverage a different deal. I took the contract to get you out of that house." The room spun. The cruelty of her family, the coldness of the mountain, the terrifying storm outside. It all faded into the background. "You don't even know me," she whispered, a tear finally escaping, tracing a hot path down her scarred cheek. Liam walked around the table. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her. He reached up, his thumb gently wiping the tear away, his touch unbelievably soft against her scar. "I know you," he said, his gaze locking onto hers with a burning, undeniable intensity. "I saw you fixing engines in the background of gala photos you were cropped out of. I read the architectural critiques you published under a pseudonym that your father ignored. I didn't want the pretty daughter, Olivia. I wanted the smart one." The revelation hung in the fluorescent light of the subterranean study, heavy and profound. Olivia stared at Liam, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. He hadn't bought a wife. He had orchestrated a rescue, and he hadn't done it out of pity. He had done it out of profound, calculated respect. "You read my critiques," she repeated, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. For years, she had submitted brutal, brilliant analyses of sustainable architecture to trade journals under the name O. Vance. Her father thought she spent her days knitting in her room. "I read all of them," Liam said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the spinning room. He turned toward the massive drafting table, gesturing to the blueprints of the Obsidian Ridge project. "In fact, your paper on alpine watershed integration is the reason I scrapped the initial foundation plans for the western sector. You argued that static concrete disrupts the natural thermal melt. You were right." Olivia stepped slowly toward the table. She looked down at the complex, beautiful lines of his design. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a luxury eco-reserve that lived symbiotically with the mountain rather than dominating it. But as her eyes scanned the lower quadrant, her analytical mind, sharpened by years of silent observation, caught a snag. "You're using standard pylons for the lower ridge suspension," she murmured, tracing a manicured fingernail over the grid. She forgot, for a moment, the scar on her face, the storm outside, and the sheer magnitude of the man standing beside her. "The bedrock here is fractured slate. If you use standard drilling, the vibration will destabilize the shelf. You need micro-pile anchors driven at a 45-degree angle." Liam didn't speak immediately. The silence stretched, tight and electric. Olivia froze, suddenly hyper-aware that she had just corrected one of the most brilliant architectural minds of the decade. She braced herself for the inevitable condescension, the sharp reminder of her place. Instead, Liam leaned over the table, his shoulder brushing hers. He braced his hands on either side of the blueprint, staring intensely at the quadrant she had pointed out. "Fractured slate," he muttered, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It transformed him, breaking the stoic mountain man facade and revealing the razor-sharp CEO beneath. He turned his head to look at her, their faces inches apart. "My engineering firm missed that. A team of 20 men missed that." "They don't know this mountain," Olivia said softly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "No," Liam agreed, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then tracing the silvery line of her scar. The touch of his eyes was almost physical. "But you do. You see the things everyone else walks past." He didn't pull away. The air in the basement suddenly felt incredibly thin. The raw survivalist tension of the storm had shifted into something entirely different. A deep, magnetic pull between two people who had spent their lives surrounded by users and sycophants. Liam lifted his hand, his rough, calloused fingers gently brushing the hair back from the scarred side of her face. He didn't hide it. He didn't ignore it. He revered it. "You were never the ugly daughter, Olivia," Liam whispered, his voice vibrating with a fierce, possessive certainty. "You were just living in a world too blind to see you." When he kissed her, it wasn't a sudden, chaotic collision. It was deliberate, deeply felt, and absolute. His lips were warm and firm, a stark contrast to the bitter cold they had fought earlier. Olivia gasped, a soft sound of surrender, and leaned into him. Her hands, still trembling slightly, found the heavy wool of his flannel shirt, pulling him closer. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off the concrete floor, anchoring her against the storm, against her past, against everything. For the first time in 26 years, Olivia Vance felt entirely, undeniably beautiful. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving behind a world buried in blinding, pristine white. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled cheerfully. Olivia sat at the kitchen island, wearing one of Liam's softest Henley shirts, a mug of tea warming her hands. She felt a profound, terrifying sense of peace. Then, the low, rhythmic thumping echoed off the canyon walls. Liam, who had been chopping kindling by the hearth, stopped instantly. His jaw clenched. He dropped the hand axe, his eyes locking onto the massive front windows. The thumping grew louder, vibrating the glass, until a sleek, black corporate helicopter crested the ridge, whipping the fresh snow into a blinding cyclone as it descended toward the cleared lower pad. Olivia's blood ran cold. The peace shattered, replaced by the suffocating familiar dread of her father's empire. "Stay here," Liam ordered, his voice returning to the dangerous, icy register she had heard on the phone. He grabbed his heavy coat and a pair of dark sunglasses. "No," Olivia said. She stood up, her legs trembling but her voice remarkably steady. The girl who had arrived yesterday, shivering in a designer coat, was gone. The woman who had bled a diesel engine and corrected Thorne Industries' blueprints remained. "He's here for me. I'm not hiding in the background anymore." Liam looked at her, his storm-gray eyes assessing the new, iron-wrought posture of her shoulders. He gave a single curt nod. He handed her his heavy canvas coat. "Then stay behind me." They walked out onto the porch together just as the helicopter engines whined down. The side door slid open. Arthur Vance stepped out, flanked by two men in dark suits. Lawyers, judging by the leather briefcases they clutched against the cold. Arthur looked furious. He trudged up the snowy path, his expensive Italian cashmere overcoat looking ridiculous against the rugged backdrop. He didn't look at Liam. His eyes locked onto Olivia, his expression contorting in disgust as he took in her oversized masculine clothing and the unhidden scar on her cheek. "Look at you," Arthur sneered, his voice carrying over the wind. "Playing house in the dirt. Get your things, Olivia. You've humiliated this family enough. The deal is dead, which means your usefulness here is over. She isn't going anywhere, Arthur. Liam stepped to the edge of the porch, effectively blocking the stairs. He looked like a king defending his fortress. I told you never to come to this mountain. You don't dictate terms to me, Thorne, Arthur barked, his face flushing a dangerous red. One of the lawyers stepped forward, nervously opening a briefcase. Actually, Mr. Vance, the lawyer stuttered, glancing fearfully at Liam. He does. We pulled the corporate filings this morning. Thorne Industries didn't just buy the Western Ridge. They bought the debt on your primary distribution centers. He owns the leverage on 30% of your supply chain. Arthur froze, the arrogance draining from his face, replaced by sudden, stark terror. He looked from the lawyer to Liam, finally realizing he had walked into a trap. You, Arthur stammered. You planned this. You took my daughter just to distract me while you gutted my company. I took your daughter, Liam said, his voice deadly quiet. Because you didn't deserve her. And if you ever speak to her like that again, I will call in the debt today, and Vance Holdings will be bankrupt by Monday morning. You think she cares about you? Arthur spat, pivoting desperately to cruelty when logic failed. She's a freak, Liam, a scarred liability. She's only staying because she has nowhere else to go. She's weak. Liam's hands curled into fists, his shoulders tensing as he prepared to step off the porch and break Arthur Vance in half. But a hand gently rested on his arm. Olivia stepped around Liam. She didn't hide behind him. She walked down the first 2 wooden steps, looking down at the man who had tormented her for a lifetime. The cold wind whipped her dark hair, framing the silver scar on her cheek like a badge of honor. I am not weak, Father, Olivia said. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell in the crisp mountain air. I survived your house, and as of an hour ago, I am not a liability. Arthur scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously. What are you talking about? Olivia reached into the pocket of the canvas coat and pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment. It was the marital trust document Arthur had sent with her, the legal loophole he had planned to exploit. I signed it, Olivia said smoothly. She held the document up. At the bottom, next to Liam's bold signature, was her own elegant script. But I didn't sign it as your proxy. I signed it as Liam's partner. Under the Homesteading Act, the land rights are now irrevocably bound to this marriage trust. You have absolutely no legal standing to contest the ridge. Arthur stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing. He looked like a fish suffocating on the ice. You betrayed your own blood. You sold your blood, Olivia corrected coldly. I just found a better buyer. Get off our mountain, Arthur, Liam commanded, stepping down to stand shoulder to shoulder with Olivia. Before I decide to keep your helicopter as collateral. Arthur Vance looked at the towering, immovable presence of Liam Thorne, and then at the fierce, unbroken woman beside him. He realized, with a crushing finality, that he had lost everything. He turned without another word, trudging back to the helicopter, his lawyers scrambling behind him. Olivia and Liam stood on the porch, watching in silence as the rotors spun up, kicking up a blizzard of white powder. The machine lifted off, banking sharply away from the ridge, shrinking into a black dot against the vast blue sky, until it was gone entirely. The profound silence of the mountain rushed back in. Olivia let out a long, shuddering breath. Her legs suddenly felt like lead. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation evaporated, leaving her hollow and exhausted. She swayed slightly, the heavy parchment slipping from her fingers. Before it hit the ground, Liam caught it. He dropped the paper on the porch and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tightly against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. You played that perfectly, he murmured, his voice a low rumble of absolute pride. You broke his empire with a single signature. Olivia rested her cheek against his heavy flannel coat, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. I broke his hold on me. That was all I cared about. Liam pulled back just enough to look at her. He reached up, his gloved thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. The intensity in his gray eyes was blinding. Are you sure about this, Olivia? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. You signed a binding legal document. You bound yourself to me, to this mountain. It's a hard life up here. It's isolating, and I am not an easy man." Olivia looked past him, taking in the breathtaking expanse of the obsidian ridge. The snow-capped peaks glittered like diamonds in the sun. The ancient pines stood tall and resilient against the harsh elements. It was wild, and it was beautiful, and it was real. Just like the man standing in front of her, she looked back at Liam. She thought about the pristine, suffocating penthouse she had left behind. The fake smiles, the cruel whispers, the relentless pressure to hide her face. Then she thought about the heat of the cabin fire, the smell of diesel and wood smoke, the deep, undeniable respect she had found in the subterranean study, and the way Liam looked at her scar not as a tragedy, but as proof of survival. "I don't want an easy man," Olivia said, a brilliant, unhindered smile breaking across her face, lighting up her eyes. "I want a partner, and I want to build something that lasts." Liam's breath hitched. He closed the distance between them, kissing her deeply, a promise sealed in the crisp alpine air. The wind howled through the canyon, wild and untamed. But for the first time in her life, Olivia Vance wasn't shivering. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Olivia's journey from a discarded pawn to a powerful architect of her own destiny proves that true beauty and strength are forged in the fires of resilience, not perfection. Liam didn't need a pristine trophy. He needed an equal, a partner who could weather the brutal storms of both the mountain and the boardroom. Together they built an empire grounded in respect, leaving the toxic shadows of her past buried in the snow forever. If this story of finding strength in your scars and claiming your true worth resonated with you, please hit the like button. Share Olivia and Liam's dramatic romance with fellow readers who love a fierce, intelligent heroine. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping cinematic stories of love, power, and revenge.